to Taking Stock 52. I've been hearing some people wonder out loud if the church is going to survive the COVID crisis. My instant answer is to say yes and no. Will it survive in its current form? I doubt it, so no. Will it survive by, as it were, a process of enforced evolution? Yeah, I believe it will. I believe it will survive in the form God intends it to have, in order to speak into and out of the same place of joy and uncertainty and suffering in which the ordinary people of this world find themselves most often. Maybe it's time for the church to be stripped of the tawdry garments of power so that it can find its true voice amongst the people God wants it to serve and to represent, and do the right thing by the oppressed and the persecuted, even if that means it is itself once more subject to persecution, because Christians have often been persecuted for doing the right thing. Some Christians, of course, seem actually to think that the best way of doing the right thing is to find something for which you will suffer and doing that. But that, of course, is to put the cart very firmly before the horse. Sometimes doing the right thing is easy, but more often we don't seem to get what we might think of as our just rewards for doing the right thing. For a short period in my life, I lived near Sawbridgeworth in Hertfordshire, and every morning I would take the train from a station called Harlow Mill to Liverpool Street to get to work, and then back again at the end of the day from Liverpool Street to Harlow Mill, and then walk home. Outside rush hours, it was a meandering journey and sometimes even pleasant. One day, coming home with my girlfriend, we sat opposite a stout lady with a large bag and a small dog. Now, I like dogs, but this was the hound from hell. I think it was a Jack Russell's Terrier. Whatever it was, it didn't like me. It sat on its mistress's lap all the way from Liverpool Street, staring at me and occasionally raising a contemptuous lip and every so often growling. Now, as I said, I like dogs, and I like dogs to like me, so it upset me that for no apparent reason, this dog had taken against me. When the train reached Harlow Mill, the lady got up from her seat and opened the carriage door and got out, heaving her voluminous bag with her and calling, "Come along, Bruno." Bruno, eager to please, but also eager to show me who was boss, backed off the train, growling and yipping at me, never for one moment taking his eyes off the enemy, which was a mistake. He backed off the train and fell straight down the narrow gap between the carriage and the platform. Bruno's owner hung on to his lead, and Bruno ended up swinging from his collar, suspended 2 feet above the permanent way. I cannot tell a lie. Part of me felt that this proved that it was a God of justice at work in the world. I even admit to hearing the words, "Swing, you! Swing!" echoing through my mind. But I knew what I had to do, really. Dropping to my hands and knees on the platform, I reached down between the platform and the train and grasped Bruno firmly by the collar. He struggled and squirmed and nearly got stuck on the way up, but I managed somehow to force him out and away from his impending demise. Just as I was pulling him free, he squirmed round, took careful aim, and bit down just about as hard as he could on the very hand which was saving him from a messy extinction. I screamed, the woman screamed, and my girlfriend, now my wife, screamed with laughter. "Don't hurt Bruno," cried the stout lady. "Don't hurt Bruno? Don't hurt Bruno? I've just saved this creature from a crushing disappointment at the very least. All the thanks I get is a set of teeth sinking into my hand, and she's telling me not to hurt him. Where's the gratitude in that? Where's the justice? Why did I have to suffer for doing the right thing?" Needless to say, that suffering was minor, however persecuted I might have felt by that dog. But Christianity's journey is also one peppered with incidents of acute suffering. It's a faith which was persecuted from its beginnings. Of course, it has no reason to be complacent, because it's not the only religion whose flames have been fanned by the searing winds of adversity, and it has done its own share of persecution down the centuries too. You only need ask anybody who's Jewish, and many who are Muslim. There are many ways in which any group of people who are persecuted may react to suffering or the possibility of suffering for what they believe in. Some recant, they renounce their beliefs. Some embrace suffering, draw attention to themselves, and even deliberately attract martyrdom. There are records of Christianity going back to Roman times which show that many bishops and theologians looked upon martyrdom, giving one's life to be a martyros, a witness in Greek, not only as a mark of God's favour, but actively to be desired amongst serious Christians in order to emulate Jesus. People who under pressure recanted and later re-embraced the faith were denounced as anathema. Now, personally, I have a strong suspicion that faced with the thumbscrews and the hot pokers, there are many people nowadays who would recant first and repent later. I probably would. Having said that though, there are many Christians scattered throughout history who've done what they've known to be right, knowing that in all probability they would suffer for it. Even in this last 2 centuries, the church has had its martyrs on every continent, from Dietrich Bonhoeffer in Europe, hung with piano wire in Flossenburg concentration camp for opposing Hitler and taking part in the July 1944 bomb plot, to Archbishop Romero, murdered on the chancel steps of a hospital chapel in the middle of celebrating the Mass because he denounced government oppression and corruption and his country's widespread poverty. Someone, somewhere, even as I speak, will be suffering for following the way of Jesus. Now, you might have thought that such persecution would wipe out a faith or belief system. In Britain, the Romans managed to wipe out the Druids, to all intents and purposes, by persecuting its followers and executing its priesthood. Presumably, such a result happened often enough to justify the use of such methods in the minds of the rulers of empires throughout the world. In human terms, it stood to reason that most people would not choose to die for the sake of a belief system. There are enough examples in Christianity in its various forms to show that true religion transcends and even transforms suffering to an extent which actually attracts believers rather than repelling them. One need only consider the case of the church in Poland in the period between 1948 and 1990. During this time, the church was proscribed by the communist authorities and severely limited in its legal activities. But instead of watching the church wither and die, the authorities had to watch helplessly as the church grew in popularity, grew in influence, and in the eyes of the people, grew in its moral authority. Ironically, since the persecution in Poland has ended, the church, whilst still tremendously strong, has seen that its popularity shows signs of being to some extent on the wane. It's almost as if the church was only worth being part of if it was worth dying to belong to it. The church in China is discovering the same thing. So perhaps the church in Britain could do with a little dose of persecution to bolster us up, to run us through the refiner's fire and turn us into gold. Yes, I can hear it all now. Down with Methodism, howl the mobs. Drag out their preachers, burn their hymn books, torch their churches, close down their women's meetings and their youth clubs. And that's only the Anglicans. You should hear what the atheists are saying. It was Dr. Johnson who said, "Depend upon it, sir, when a man knows he is to be hanged in a fortnight, it concentrates the mind wonderfully." In times of good health, full employment, and a rich lifestyle, a lot of people do turn their back on God. It's only when things go wrong that people turn to or turn back to the God they'd long abandoned as being inconvenient or too demanding of time, commitment, or money. The Old Testament is full of stories of when the people of Israel abandoned the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in times of prosperity and ease. And human nature has not changed that much in the intervening years. The churches are invariably full during times of war, for example. But we find it very easy to persuade ourselves that we do not need God when we do not seem to be in need of anything else either. In these times, the persecution that Christians suffer is more insidious and can be in its own way just as debilitating to the health of the church and its fellowship. Sometimes the need for fortitude is just as great as if we were being cast into the flames again. I've lost count of the times that people I know and care about have been mocked for their beliefs, sometimes gently, sometimes with malice, always with laughter. I've never met anyone in this country who's been beaten up for their Christianity, but I have listened to many accounts of when people have been belittled by insidiously barbed remarks, nasty little prods and scorn. But let's not fool ourselves. I very much doubt whether I or anyone else watching this video, in the Western world at least, will ever have been imprisoned for our Christian beliefs. We're fortunate that we're free to believe in any God or none. We are blessed indeed that most of us, for most of our lives, most of the time, don't have to worry about where our next meal is coming from, whether the water supply will last all day, or whether our children are safe to walk the streets. Until recently, due to the COVID crisis, we've not had to conform to any government regulations about where we may meet, or how we meet, or who we may worship. In human terms, we are free. However, the quote from Dr. Johnson illustrates some of the problems the church has with freedom, lack of concentration. If we are free, then we are as free to ignore faith as we are to embrace it. In this country at least, freedom means that nothing much happens to persuade the broad mass of people that the Christian faith is anything other than the province of a few weird people who pray to an invisible God through the agency of a first century Palestinian Jew who died a criminal's death. And we've colluded in this, we Christians. Over the centuries of the Christian era, we have, for example, driven people away by the exercise of temporal power, making thousands of nominal Christians through the exercise of power. Wealth and places among the elite for our leaders have allowed the church to wield the big Christian stick to make thousands, if not millions, of nominal Christians over the years. And the faith has been devalued as a result. It became something you do rather than something you are, and something most people have now mostly ceased doing, or certainly have ceased doing frequently enough, because there are other things to do, many of which have been accorded an equal or better claim on people's lives and time. Belief, over the years, has become equated with church attendance, and if church attendance is anything to go by, Christianity has been reduced to the status of a folk religion in too many homes for us to be able to claim that this is now a Christian country. We're no worse off, though, than in reality we always were. Ever since the Roman Emperor Constantine made Christianity the state religion, the church has never really had to struggle for its very existence. Well, maybe it's time for the refiner's fire. Maybe it's time for the harrowing. Time for the rebalancing. Perhaps now we will discover how to stop worrying about the existence of the church and start working out how God is calling us to embody the church in our own lives and in the life of the community, not just in the life of buildings. Stay safe, people.